So thanks, Liz. That was a great presentation, and it sort of really highlights a lot of the background issues that I think we're trying to conceive of and implement a practical but meaningful stakeholder engagement plan for the restoration program going forward. So many of the concerns and issues and lessons that Liz has highlighted are certainly things that we need to take on board and respond to in the way in which we put our plan together and work with stakeholders over coming months and years. So I've got the lucky job of leading a team of social scientists from a number of institutions who are all listed on that slide there, and together we're bringing together a number of social science informed analyses that will contribute towards hopefully a robust and meaningful engagement platform. So I guess over the last couple of days we've heard that corals grow in colonies, and we also see groups like this, the North Queensland Cowboys fans kind of hang out in colonies as well. But I guess what you don't see when you look into that kind of seemingly light group of individuals is the fact that they're actually incredibly diverse. So yes, they're part of the general public, the citizenry, but also there's going to be people within that group who've got very kind of clear interest and stake in different issues. There are going to be people who are attached to particular places that are important to them and identify with those places. And so it's really important when we're talking about stakeholder engagement that we're aware of that dynamic that sits between the broader community and the public, and kind of what role or say the public has in a conversation about reef restoration. But within that public, there are going to be groups who are connected to place and connected to core interests around the reef who will kind of need special consideration, will have a more direct stake in what's happening rather than just have an opinion. And I'm certainly not trying to discount the role of broader public participation and engagement. That is going to be fundamental to us, but we also have to be aware of differentiating between those different groups in society and providing opportunities for each of those groups to participate. And in terms of reef restoration, there's obviously some groups who are going to be kind of fundamental to effective collaboration in this space, and primary to that are traditional owners, and traditional owners are critical because they occupy kind of many important places in that engagement spectrum. They have direct livelihood implications around the health and well-being of the reef. They're institutional stakeholders in the sense they've got very clear legal rights and custodial obligations around protection of land and sea country related to the reef. But there's also, of course, all those other key groups such as the tourism sector, the commercial and recreational fishing sectors, local government as key representatives of local communities and who have also a key institutional role. We also need to be cognizant of the existing suite of advisory arrangements which are in place already, so that have got like a well-established community-based advisory network for the reef and the local marine advisory committees, and also the sector-based advisory committees. And how do we make good use of that and engage constructively through those networks? So at the risk of kind of repeating some of Lucy's core insights here, there's an issue here about why do we engage with stakeholders, and I'd really like to stress the point, if it's one thing that you take away from today, that this is not just like meeting a procedural requirement for the reef restoration program. Good engagement will result in not only a better outcome, but a fairer process. And that is good for everyone. It actually ensures our long-term success. And this is a long-term endeavour that we're starting on. So we can't think about engagement as a point in a delivery process. We need to think about engagement as an ongoing, constructive conversation with different groups over years, not weeks or months. So what I'm trying to get across in this slide is that some of those benefits or some of those reasons why you would engage range from what we would think about in terms of communication or public consultation, in terms of sharing information on goals and progress of the program, through to identifying impacts from different stakeholders' perspectives, through to providing a mechanism to bring in those different types of knowledge, and as Gavin was sort of saying earlier in the week, different ways of seeing the world and different ways of understanding the problem. It's really important that the people whose rights and values and interests in the reef are likely to be affected, positively or negatively, by restoration activities have some influence in the decision-making process. And as we know, and Mark was talking about structured process to innovation, good engagement and the collaboration that flows from that is fundamental to innovation in this space. And I guess out of all that, I guess I see the sort of end goal around, or one of the end goals around stakeholder and public support for action as being, if you like, something that kind of emerges from doing all that other stuff well, There's also challenges. A lot of the technologies that we're talking about this week, we're still uncertain about what their long-term effectiveness is or some of the negative consequences of that. We also have some degree of uncertainty about what the future state of the reef environment is going to look like, and so having a conversation with communities and industries is tough in that regard as well. The difference in opinions and perspectives and values that different groups bring raises issues around how do we come to some sort of consensus, and if we can't come to a consensus about what to do, how can we reach a pragmatic compromise about what the next steps need to be? And I kind of, not shocked, but I was kind of intrigued to kind of look back and look at the scale of the engagement around the rezoning plan in the Reef in the early 2000s, and the fact that that initiative over 3 years involved 600 meetings, 90 locations and 31,000 submissions on that process. So that just gives you a sense of the level of interest and the scale of engagement which can sometimes be required here. And I'm not suggesting that that's the ideal model that we follow, but that's the sort of potentially the size of the task. Going that. Look, I sort of knocked this little triangle together, and it was really just to highlight the fact that when we think about stakeholder engagement or public participation, often from a science community perspective, which I'm part of, we want to jump straight to the technologies. We want to jump straight down to the pointy end of that triangle as the basis for engagement. But as Lucy was sort of illustrating earlier, there's a whole suite of considerations that either come before or at least come in parallel with that conversation about technology. Good engagement needs to focus around not just the specifics of the technologies, but why are we doing this? What are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? How are we framing the problem? What's the implied or explicit management logic that we're using here? Is it about prevention? Is it about repair? What are going to be the roles of different organisations and stakeholders in driving this forward? Where is it going to be deployed? I mean, inherently in the question of deployment brings in questions of spatial benefit and cost, and that there are going to be places where this work happens and places where it doesn't, and those different places engage different interests. Who's going to be involved in deployment and how? And then the specifics about the technology itself. So all those considerations feed into some of those key drivers of acceptance, which are around both the distributional consequences of what we're doing, who benefits and who carries risk, and also what the underlying procedural issues are and whether they're met. So I guess jumping back a little bit from the concepts to the practicalities around the RAP engagement planning process, The team is currently doing a range of activities, and I guess they're pretty standard social science activities, and we're using that information to start to design an engagement plan which we can then implement over coming months. The first of those activities is a national survey of Australian public and GBR residents' attitudes. So there's 3,000 respondents from the broader Australian public and 1,500 respondents from GBR catchment areas. We're doing a review of the existing advisory arrangements. We're looking at international best practice. Max Newlands is going to be talking today about some work around assessing public sentiment through social media analysis. And I guess I've been most heavily involved with colleagues like Karen Vella in terms of conducting interviews with some of those key stakeholders. If I can, I just want to give you a very quick sense of some of the feedback we're getting from those groups so far. So from an environmental NGO perspective, some of the issues that we're hearing is that the next window of opportunity, which is 5 to 10 years, so why are we working on solutions that will take this long to develop? Restoration is potentially misdirected at the expense of other priorities, and we kind of heard of it earlier this week. There's trust in the science, but we want to be avoiding the technical fix. From dive tour operators that we've been talking to, there's a really strong sense that the local knowledge of those people who've been living and working on the reef over the last 20 or 30 years has got a good understanding of change in those ecological systems, and we ignore that at our peril. And conversations with LMAC chairs is highlighting, I guess, the difference in managerial capacity that exists up and down the coast, and the fact that if we're going to be engaging through these local advisory committees, we need to recognise the different capabilities that they bring to that process. Thanks, Matt. Last 5 seconds is that we'll be using the work we're doing to inform a draft stakeholder engagement plan, and from that plan we'll kind of identify some pilots that we can start working on towards the end of this year. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We do have time for a question.